To this LinkedIn Live. I'm excited to have you join us today for this very special LinkedIn Live session. So I'm excited to introduce you to a man who has been a trailblazer in the world of intellectual property and commercial law advertising technology companies since advising technology companies rather since the late 90s. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Simon Portman.
Hi, Spence.
Thanks for joining me. Simon heads up the Marks and Clark XR team and operates from the heart of Europe's largest tech cluster, Cambridge and London, servicing clients globally. Simon's work is incredibly diverse and far-reaching, extending to entrepreneurs, universities, charities, and companies in various sectors, from life science, electronics to software and entertainment, which is why we're going to be talking about a bit more today. But what truly sets Simon apart is his unparalleled expertise in IP law, intellectual property. His proficiency extends to drafting and negotiating commercial contracts, advising on regulatory issues, conducting IP and commercial due diligence, and much more. He's the guy you want in your corner when navigating the complex world of IP. He's also an accomplished author, having contributed to esteemed publications like Patent World, The Times, Managing Intellectual Property, and the Financial Times. Simon is the co-author of the textbooks Commercial Issues for Life Science Companies and Intellectual Property, the Lifeblood of Your Company. Today, we're fortunate to have him here to share his insights on how independent musicians can protect and profit from their intellectual property. So without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you.
So can you briefly explain what intellectual property means for an independent artist?
Right. Well, intellectual property it's like property of a physical kind or land, in that it is a valuable asset which can be sold or rights granted to it for money. But it's called intellectual property because it is, it has a creative or intellectual origin and output to it, rather than you making something physical. And as we have got more technologically and creatively minded over the years, increasingly intellectual property has taken up more and more of the proportion of the value in a company. So whereas, say, in the 19th century, the bulk of a company's value would reside in its plant and its machinery and its product, now it will often reside in its intellectual property, and that might be in its brand, if it's a company like Coca-Cola, in its patents, if it's a drug company or a technology company, or the copyright in its creative output if it's a film production company or an author. So, and because these things are so valuable, that's why you're charging money to make them available. And that's often because a lot of money has gone into their creation. So when you end up paying a lot of money, say for a pharmaceutical product, the amount of money that's gone into making that is probably a few pence. But what you're paying for is all the money that's gone into creating it and validating it, and also all the money that's gone into the failures. And in the same way, if you think of all the money that's gone into the creation of a song or a film or a TV program or a novel, and the time and all that is why then people are paying money to access it when it comes out the other end. So, really intellectual property and the fact that you can then derive value from it is what incentivizes people to generate any creative output.
So how can understanding IP laws help musicians protect their work and maximize their profits?
Well, I think first of all, what they need to realize is that there are various types of intellectual property. The ones that probably for a budding musician are most going to apply are going to be copyright, which applies to protection for creative works and stops anyone else copying them. And creative works covers music, books, anything written anything in graphic form, also computer software. So what if I write a song, I as author will have copyright in that. If someone then starts distributing and copying that without my permission, then I would be able to take legal action to stop that, and I'd claim damages if I can prove that there has been loss as a result. And obviously, there's copyright in the wider music world will not just apply to this will apply not just to the composition, but also to different recordings of it. So even when music might, the actual music itself might come off copyright, say 70 years after the death of the creator, you might still get copyright, residing in new recordings of it. That's why, I could do a recording of Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, and the copyright is going to reside in that recording, even though that doesn't stop anyone else playing and recording it. Also, because it applies to visual material, that means that you also get copyright residing in any video for a song as well. So if you are a new musician, then you it may well be that at the outset, the way to get to kick off is to make all your stuff available virally on social media, so that you're building up that awareness. And then when you're creating value, people will want to pay to get access to your music. And increasingly, the two ways of doing that are on the downloads and also in the performances. And then that's when it's very crucial to link up with people experienced like yourselves in terms of agents, producers, distributors, and so forth, so that they can then help you in marketing and monetizing your product. But obviously, you need people like me to look at the contracts to make sure that they're not taking all the money, and also that maybe you're not giving them all the rights, because you might rights in another territory, in another language, or different forms of rights like mechanical rights might be better reserved for someone else. So these are all the things you need to look at. So that's copyright. Another thing, so good examples of copyright and where people have, talked about copyright infringement in that regard are, firstly, there've been two quite high profile cases with Ed Sheeran where he was found not to have infringed, but the allegation there was that he had copied elements of another musician's work. However, you have to show that there has been substantial copying, and also that it's not independent creation, it is actually copying. Now, that copying can be, unconscious. So a few years ago, it was found that George Harrison had subconsciously copied a Ronnie Mac song, Now, obviously, it's quite hard to prove subconscious copying. You've got to prove that music was clearly out there and that the defendant was very likely to be saturated by it for it to be in their head and for them to start churning it out. So I think there are two things there, lessons to be drawn from that are, when you are, generating your own music, be careful about ripping other people off. And also at the same time, at the other end, don't think that because there might be slight elements of similarity to what you're doing, that someone has copied you, because sometimes it might be a coincidence. As Ed Sheeran said, there are certain structures and rhythms and chords and building blocks of music that everyone uses. And I think another thing to bear in mind, if you look at that, is Ed Sheeran said how stressful this has been for him, and it really has ruined his life. And I think he said, if I lose this one, I'm just going to jack it in. So it's far better to be in the clear in these regards, because it is stressful and it is expensive. Even if you're in the right, and even if you win, it's far better not to be in a situation where you end up litigating about copyright infringement anyway.
Mhm.
Another one that's very common with music is the brand. So musicians might brand their name or the name of the band or whatever, and that's where you might apply for a trademark. Uh, and then if anyone else uses that trademark within the countries and the classes that you have applied for it in, then you can go after them for trademark infringement and again claim damages if you've suffered loss. Now, a very good example of a recent trademark case in the music world is the Katy Perry versus Katy Perry one, where music Katy Perry was found to have infringed the trademarks of clothing Katy Perry. But I don't think any damages were awarded because it was viewed as something that had been done in good faith. But what that shows is you've got to be very careful. If I apply for the trademark Simon Portman in music, if I'm suddenly going to start using that for Simon Portman in clothing, then I better start looking out to make sure that there is nothing else out there in those classes or in other countries. So this is why musicians also look at, if they do apply for a brand, for applying not just in music but in other fields as well for the brand, because obviously merchandising can make a huge amount of money. And I think a good example of this in another field was George Lucas, where he kept the merchandising, the trademark rights to Star Wars, and all he thought he was going to do was to sell a few T-shirts, and it ended up where I think before the only franchises in the entertainment sector that had really taken advantage of merchandising were James Bond and Captain Scarlet, with toys and figures and that sort of thing. And then with Star Wars, it really took off, and likewise, you buy the record, you get the T-shirt with merchandising. So those are the two main ones for the purely creative output. You also now get you get patents, which is 20-year protection for something of novel or industrial application, and obviously in the music field they're going to apply more in technology. So that's going to be things like musical instruments, production software. Increasingly now, AI and XR are used. So you can have virtual concerts. You're having AI generating music. So anyone who's making music or producing it or getting to sound engineer, getting to being a sound engineer, then the technology side is immensely important. You can you're even getting people now, if you think you have virtual production, you might have patented processes for making props for a concert or a video. So the whole intellectual property world really does pervade the industry.
Yeah, that's totally. I guess that's a new thing that's happening, right, with AI and how that affects copyright, because there's a lot of, I guess, there's a lot of fear around that people are just going to have their things copied without, with copyright infringements happening, and I guess it's happening at such a big scale with AI that. Is that going to be affecting your industry in a whole bunch?
I think there is a concern about AI, particularly when we've seen the whole ChatGPT thing. About firstly, is it going to put a whole load of people out of work? And also, whether it's ChatGPT or these AI created images, what are they trawling and what are they borrowing from to infringe copyright? Now, that may also be a danger with music. To be honest, though, the whole AI generated music package thing has been around for some years now. I mean, I'm at least 10, and it started out with you being able to use AI to generate your own fairly generic music that you might have as incidental music on a documentary or whatever. But now I think you may have seen that the Google AI text to music generator, Music LM, has just come out. And that means that I can type in, please write me a soulful violin concerto, or some really heavy thrash metal, or it's going to get to a point where it's more specific, and it might be given that the weather in England is just one rainy season, how would Vivaldi have written a one English season? And then the AI would probably try and combine all the elements of the 4 seasons and come out with something. Now, I think there's a lot of people I've talked to, a lot of musicians, particularly session musicians or composers for film and television, are looking at these things and saying, well, we're going to see this as an aid to what we're doing, So I think there is going to be a certain amount of adaptation and a redefinition of roles. But I don't think it's necessarily going to key off creativity or profitability. And obviously, also, when you think about it, the value of any given piece of music is often who composed it. And we can all think probably of musicians who are singers have done okay, and then you realise they are really, really prolific and successful as songwriters, writing songs that other people have sung. And you think, oh, I didn't know he or she wrote that. In the same way, probably if you're going to hear that a song is written by so-and-so rather than by AI, it's going to have more cachet than anyone wondering, well, did they use the AI to help them? And as you may be aware, in the same way that there has been a big debate on whether, if you have an invention generated by AI, whether that AI program can be viewed as an inventor on the patent application. And most jurisdictions are saying probably not. We might be getting into the point of, the case of, can AI be an author of copyrighted work? So my view is that's probably secondary to the implications of people being infringed or personal data being trawled without people's permission and so forth. So, yeah.
Just going back to you were talking about copyright. So what are some common misconceptions artists have about IP? So there's one of them that comes up for me is if you write a song, you put it on a CD, remember those, and you post it to yourself and recorded delivery and don't open the letter, then that's copyrighted. So is that
well, copyright
a good way of doing it? Is that the best way of doing it?
Now, well, in some countries like in the US, you register it. You have to do that in the UK. But yeah, stuff to yourself. Since some conceptions, one is misconceptions. One is when you see that little C in a circle symbol on something, and it says copyright Simon Portman, that is me denoting that I'm the copyright holder. If I'm not, it's me sticking it on there doesn't mean I am, and if I haven't put it on there, it doesn't mean I'm not. So it doesn't actually confer the protection. It just means if you have got the fact that you are the copyright holder, then it means that you are putting people on notice of that fact. Another thing is that the author of a creative work doesn't necessarily end up being the owner of the copyright in it, in the same way that the inventor of a patent doesn't necessarily end up being the owner of it. If you are employed by someone and it is your job to generate stuff, then your employer is going to own the copyright in it, or you might contractually assign it to someone. So that might happen with music, where your production company might end up owning the copyright. So that's why you always want to end up looking very carefully at the contracts about who ends up owning your output. Another thing to bear in mind is that whereas with patents there is no defense of independent creation, so if I have a patented invention and I have protection for that, and you quite independently come up with the same invention afterwards, if you start using it, you will be infringing my patent. Whereas copyright, there is a defense of independent creation. So if you and I both independently came up with a song that sounded exactly the same, and it could be proved that neither of us copied the other, then we would both have copyright in that. Probably the value of one or the other will be degraded as a result, but that's just bad luck. A good example of this in another field is a few years ago there was an Asian film called The Raid, where these policemen get stuck in a tower block and they have to fight their way up to the top to get to the bad guys. Coincidentally, at the same time, there was a Judge Dredd film that came out, which had exactly the same plot. They'd both just come out with the same plot. So these things happen. And I remember once reading that you often get in Hollywood where screenwriters sue a film studio because they said, I sent you my script and that was exactly the same, and look, someone else has written the script and it's just the same as mine. And often it's just a coincidence. I think I once read that Sylvester Stallone said that if any budding writer came up to him with an idea, he immediately stuck his fingers in his ears and ran off saying, got the script, because he was so paranoid that people would subsequently claim that he'd copied them when he hadn't. So that's another thing. There is an offence of independent creation there. And copying copyright, you have to copy a substantial amount, which very much depends on what the the details of the case in question, which is why Ed Sheeran was found to be in the clear.
So just going back to the Ed Sheeran thing, so what steps should an independent musician take to protect their IP laws so they don't end up in these kind of situations?
I think the best thing is, obviously, apart from contractually protecting what you have and making a decision about when you're going to start charging money, rather than just putting it out there to create viral awareness, it is, don't copy other people. And that's sort of, it's hard to say because, as I said, it always depends on the cases. It's just that sort of you know it when you see it. There have been a number of music copyright cases which have settled out of court, particularly in America, because the thing with America is that you have jury trials. And then what often happens is that the jury might see a rich, well-known musician, and then they will see some much less well-off, less well-known musician who's claiming, oh look, there are some of the same chords in this song. They copied me. And then whatever the law says and what are the facts of the case are, they might be tempted to just side with the underdog, and think, and you often get this where people feel sorry for the plaintiff or the underdog, and they award them damages because it's almost like you're vicariously winning the lottery that way. Because you're thinking, well, in that situation, I'd like to win and I'd like to get that money. So I think, sure, that's why I think you sometimes get cases settling out of court because someone doesn't want to run the risk of a jury trial, even if they think they're in the clear, So it is quite, and as I said, quite apart from the fact that turning up in court and preparing for a case is expensive and time consuming, it is an unpleasant and stressful experience. And it's probably more, and if you think of the recent Ed Sheeran Marvin Gaye case, it was probably more personally stressful for Ed Sheeran than the people handling Marvin Gaye's estate, because emotionally, they were acting in the best interests of they felt of the estate, which they had a job to further the interests of. But in terms of stress, they didn't have a personal dog in the fight. So. But my view is, although I work with, it's far better to get these things right in terms of, securing stuff with contracts and not copying other people so that you don't end up having to litigate. I think in that regard, and I don't want to get into too much law here, one of the things that musicians find when they set out, I think there are two things. Firstly, lawyers and anything for setting yourself up cost a lot of money, and often they don't have that money at the outset, just as the same anyone getting into acting or film or whatever. So I would advise, firstly, avail themselves of people who can give them advice, like people like you. Get to know, music producers, and we certainly know a couple who care about new acts and want to invest in them. See if you can, join organisations like the Musicians Union and that. See what grants are available for musicians that you can, the money, so that it's not just, coming out of your own money. See if you can get any sort of investment as well. I think that probably the biggest mistake I find with new clients in the creative fields is, and this just doesn't apply to music, but also to animation, VR. It is, people tend to think, well, the important thing about this is the creativity. That's all. That's not going to bother with any of the legal stuff or whatever. And then they come a massive cropper. And they also tend to think, because you generally start doing these things with your, whether it's within, if you're in a band or using software developers or writers or whatever, you think, well, these are all my mates, nothing's going to go wrong, But you really want this stuff tied down in contracts at the start, because often it's the people who are your mates where it does really go wrong, So, for example, a band is a collection of people, but are you going to set up a legal entity about that? What happens if people leave? Who owns the songs? Is it the band or is it an individual in the band if they go elsewhere? That's why you see if someone leaves the band, they might be not using some of its songs, or they might be, depending on what the contract was. If there isn't, if that's not laid out in a contract, then who knows? And you get into a dispute because you don't know what should be happening. And particularly where you get bands where people fall out, people come and go, and some of them might then come back. I can certainly think of bands where, they have very few of the original members in them now, and probably there are some bands where none of the original members are there. It's a bit like Trigger's Broom and Only Fools and Horses. He's changed the handle 10 times and the head 5 times, but it's still the same broom, So I would say if you're in a band, that is one of the most important things. But without getting it, but yeah, seek legal advice right from the start. Even if it's like most, particularly, we, for instance, will always give anyone a free hour at the outset anyway, to help them with any issues. So,
yeah, and so in your experience, what are some key strategies that musicians can use to monetize their intellectual property?
The ones I know that I think, firstly, and this is it, but you've actually, the first thing is to actually, of course, this is easier said than done, is to generate stuff that people want to listen to. At the same time, though, create what you like and what you're good at, and don't try and second guess the market. I think also, as I said, maybe the ones I've known that have started out, from nothing and done well, apart from that, as in people actually want to listen to it, is creating some viral awareness with free stuff and then moving to charge further down the line, and start talking to people in the industry so that you can get, piggyback off the expertise and the connections of sound engineers, producers that are going to be invested in new acts, and get advice in terms of an agent and legal advisors from people who are going to be in it for you, and will make sure that you don't get ripped off. It's a bit hard to sort of get into specific details without talking about clients in a way that might make them identifiable or making this overly legal. But what I would say, that anyone watching this, if they have got any specific questions, is, contact me offline about this, because, often people are a bit wary of saying stuff on one of these recording sessions because, it's revealing their confidential plans. But anyone who wants an initial half-hour chat, we can do that. I talked earlier about using about getting a brand. The good thing about trademarks is that it's the one form of intellectual property that lasts forever as long as you keep paying the fees. That said, they cost money to apply for and keep. So probably it's worth not applying for a brand until you've got a bit of profile and a bit of money under your belt. But also in the same way, just as you don't want to find that you're copying other people's songs, is before you apply for a trademark for the name or logo for your band or your act or your name, is you need to go out and look there to make sure that there isn't anyone that already has it taken. And that's where Katy Perry came across with the clothing issue. And in that regard, it does help to use a trademark attorney, because looking yourself on the internet is all very well, but trademark attorneys will be able to search registers in a much more in-depth way, and they can work out what may or may not be a problem. And they can also, as I said, tell you what classes you should apply for a trademark in, because you might be looking at, not just the music, but getting into related areas like books, films, programs, games, merchandising, as time goes on. So another thing is, and this took off during lockdown, but it's probably receded a bit now, but it's still out there. Is that in lockdown, a lot of musicians ended up doing virtual concerts in VR. And the Finnish company Zone was a particularly successful platform for this. And I think that Finland, in Helsinki, there is an annual May Day concert. The first year in lockdown, they obviously couldn't do it. So they did it all virtually in a virtual arena. And as well as the bands, anyone signing up to be an audience member can also attend virtually using their avatar. And as we know, you've probably seen that, the VR rejuvenation of ABBA and the AR concert that Gorillaz have put on. So I think these are areas where they prove that you can actually put a concert on and get a much wider audience without going to the logistical problems of actually doing it physically. And even where you are doing it physically, virtual production means that it's often going to look brilliant on television, when actually all of that stuff isn't necessarily there physically in the studio. So I think virtual production is one of the things that has really taken off, partly as a result of lockdown as well.
So, as an independent musician, you were talking about getting legal advice early and getting sort of legal advice in your team at the beginning. So, is there any other, apart from sort of just legal advice, people like yourself, people lawyers and IP lawyers, can they help musicians in other areas? Can they sort of broker deals? Can they match people to certain deals and that kind of thing as well as reach?
They can up to a point. Often, though, there are also, we know some, is people that are experts in music financing or deal brokering. I can, in the same way that I can put people on, clients onto people like that, or potential investors in that. But then I wouldn't necessarily do the finance side myself, because I'm a lawyer in quite a wide range of technical and artistic areas. So I think if I added any more strings to my bow, I'd be blagging it. But also remember that there are other, professional advisors you need. It's important to have an accountant. You may also need insurance. I mean, one of the things I also do at the other end is, as I'm based in Cambridge, I give advice to some of the Cambridge colleges about when they hire top line acts for their balls and other events. When I was a student, these things were much less professionally run, and it was like you got the acts on their way up or on their way down for not that much money, and you might get a ticket for free. If you worked on security or helped set the fairground up, And if you want security, you let your mates in the door and all that. And now all these things are heavily regulated. It's a case of health and safety. Local authority noise abatement policies are the people helping out employees. So it means now, you've got issues of the act turning up. What right will there be to use their brand to publicise it? What control can you exert over filming of the performance? Who's going to be liable for any damage or no-shows and that sort of thing. So you're going to need advice in much more mundane areas as well. I mean, again, I was talking earlier about viral marketing. As we all know, you can't really stop that easily someone filming a performance on their phone. It's all very well to say a select number of film critics are going to see a sneak film preview of a Hollywood film, and you collect their phones and put them in a Faraday bag at the beginning, but you can't do that with a venue full of people, even if you can stop official recordings. But to be honest, most artists view someone sticking a song that they filmed on their phone up on YouTube as viral marketing. It's when someone starts recording professionally the whole concert and then selling copies of that they're going to kick off. But so insurance is another professional advisor an insurance broker, because there are going to be like damage to concerts, concerts, liability for cancellations, the nightmare of possible copyright infringement allegations or whatever. So and the thing about insurance is, just as different lawyers specialize in different areas, different insurance brokers specialize in different areas. So we know different insurance brokers for biotech, pharmaceutical, education, charity, entertainment, whatever, because so a music specific insurance broker will be able to get you the best cover for the best premiums, and a bit like us, also give you good risk management advice.
So if you had a band and they had a manager, would this be the manager's job to sort all this out, or is it the band's job?
Normally, it would be the managers. It might be worth just speaking to if you're a band and you don't yet have a manager, but you're doing things where there might be risk being incurred, then it's worth speaking to a lawyer about whether it might be worth speaking to a broker about insurance, but what you always want to do in any event is if you're not insured, but say, if you think about it, if you're a new band and you're doing a gig somewhere, it would not be unreasonable for you to expect the venue to have the insurance, if anything goes wrong. And to be honest, if the venue made an up and coming band and just started out liable, they're probably not going to get the money off them anyway. That said, even if you're covered by your own insurance or someone else's, it's far better, even if you're covered, that nothing goes wrong. So it is better that you do turn up. It is better that you don't stage dive onto the audience and flatten someone and injure them, even if you are covered, because it's not great PR and your premiums aren't going to be as good next year. So a danger I often say to both artists and venues hiring them for an act is never think it doesn't matter, I've got insurance. Always make sure that your liability is limited in the contract and that you conduct yourself to minimize the risk of anything going wrong, so you never have to claim under the insurance. Because as I said, firstly, insurance companies will try and say it's excluded if they can, and secondly, your premiums aren't going to be so good next year.
Thanks, Simon. It's been great to have you on. We just had a geyser of knowledge come spouting out there, and I hope anyone who's watching this or watching this on the replay, let us know your favourite takeaways in the comments down below. We've had a comment that flashed up on here. So we had Catherine saying about, as an artist myself, I find it helpful using ChatGPT for press releases. It saves me time. Of course, I'll always correct it if something is wrong. And I think that's the beauty of ChatGPT. It can
I think so.
Make things, but it can also creates legal documents. Is that right as well?
I think I think things will be coming in that regard. I think there is a certain amount of yes. I think Catherine's comment said she has two sentences there. One displays the upside of it, and one displays the downside. Is you've got to look out for the errors, because the thing with AI is it's rubbish in and it's rubbish out. There was a good example. I've got two good examples of where AI can go wrong. One might be apocryphal. There's a story that Robert McNamara, the American Secretary of State, who had been the youngest ever president, I think, of General Motors. He was very into computers and computer modeling and that. When he realized in the end of the 60s that the Vietnam War wasn't going the way it should, he fed all the data on both sides into the mainframe computer at Langley that the CIA had about, the number of troops, the population, the GDP, everything he knew about both America and Vietnam. And he said, and the computer was asked, when are we going to win the Vietnam War? And the answer came back several days later, and you would like to imagine great flashing lights and reeling spools of tape. And the answer was, you won in 1966. So yeah, I think things like ChatGPT will get more and more versatile, and they will be useful. Then again, and they will lead to a redefinition of certain roles. But yeah, you've got to watch out for where they just get things wrong. And I think someone actually asked the question of, I don't know whether it was ChatGPT, but it was one AI program. What is the biggest danger of AI? And it was it will create false narratives and fake news to destroy humans. If it sees them as a threat or thinks they're bad for the planet, that's the way it will do it, by setting everyone at loggerheads with very convincing fake news and narratives that it's putting out there. It won't be launching nukes; it'll be launching Twitter nukes.
Well, I mean, you could argue that that's already happening.
Yeah, well, at the moment it's us doing it, but if AI does it, then it's going to increase exponentially, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's
a whole other topic.
That is absolutely another topic there. So we'll leave that as a cliffhanger. But Simon, it's been great to have you on. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope people who are watching this live or on the replay will also learn a bit. As I said, drop your comments down below, any questions. And I'm sure there's one more time, Simon, where we can find you if you're a band, a musician, we want to get some legal advice.
I'm on LinkedIn, so hit me up there. And also, if you go on the Marks and Clark website and find my profile, my contact details are there.
Perfect.
Like well, everybody else, don't necessarily turn up at the office and think I'll be there, because I work from home on an on-off basis, but I'm on email and phone and LinkedIn, so I'm easy to get hold of.
Understood. Thanks. Well, thank you again, Simon, and we'll see you guys next time, next week on the LinkedIn Live. Have a prosperous day. Take care. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks very much. Good to be with you.